It started with my bruises disappearing. I became the proud owner of a black eye during cheer practice. One of our flyers, Brittany Carlisle, punched me in the face during our outro, and it took some serious self-control not to start screaming like a baby. Brittany may have looked like she couldn't hurt a fly, but she had a mean right hook, even if it was an accidental falling of her arms when she had been caught in the music in the heat of the moment. I knew my face was messed up from the look on Coach's face when she handed me frozen peas wrapped in a towel and tried to smile, but her supposed smile kept widening into a grimace. It was bad. This sucked because, according to my mother, I was not allowed to get a bruise, especially on my face. Robbie, my best friend on the sidelines, made it very clear that the bruise was bad. When I grabbed a makeup mirror and risked a glance at myself, he was right. It was bad. This thing was worse than eye bags. In the changing rooms after practice, I remember trying to smile through the pain in my face, which was slowly spreading to my eye and the back of my head. I tried to hide it with makeup, but it somehow looked worse. So, I gave up. I didn't think about the bruise until I was walking back from school a little later. The pain was gone, and it didn't really hit me until I was video chatting with Robbie, and his expression crumbled, inclining his head like a confused puppy.
Holy shit. How'd you fix your face?
I paused, my gaze flicking to my reflection in the camera. I wasn't a fan of looking at myself. When I video chat, I minimize the screen and scroll through Instagram or search for a YouTube video to watch on mute while Robbie talks about moon landing conspiracies. I didn't mean to look at myself. I had trained my eyes not to look too hard through a camera because all of my flaws were present, and Mom always had something to say if I did not look perfect. I have a makeup routine as well as 2 skincare rituals before I go to bed and wake up, but it's not enough. I don't look as cute as I did as a little kid. I'm a lot rounder in the face, and apparently, I've been putting on weight in my cheeks. Mom has been using filters on my face since I was a little kid, and now I can't take my real reflection seriously.
What?
I frowned at my pale face and slightly half-lidded eyes from a sleepless night. In the camera, I looked the same as I always did. Light brown hair pulled into a ponytail and minimal makeup. I winced at the state of my hair. I forgot to brush it after practice, so it was a mess in my face. Mom usually filmed my siblings and I coming home from school and made it clear we couldn't look a mess. We had to look picture perfect for the camera. I made a mental note to fix myself up. I didn't understand what Robbie was talking about until I found myself gingerly prodding under my right eye before the thought slammed into me. Something ice cold crept its way down my spine. I had a bruise, I thought, dizzily. Coming to an abrupt stop on the sidewalk, the sound of traffic flying by collapsed into a buzzing white sound in my head. So, where was it?
Dude, what happened to your battle scar?
Robbie's voice joined an endless buzzing blur of nothing inside my skull. I remember feeling foggy-headed, his words not quite registering. What bruise was on my lips, only for me to remind myself that Brittany Carlisle had punched me in the face not even 2 hours earlier. I had sat in the nurse's office with a bag of peas pressed to my face, downing Tylenol with a can of Coke, and complaining of a striking pain that was not going away. So, how did I forget? How did I forget the pain that was very much real? Several things had happened between the hit and walking home presently. I went to grab my things from the changing rooms and ended up talking to a girl about a concert she was planning to go to. I definitely had the bruise then, because she commented on it, making a joke that I wouldn't be the face of the squad for a few days. Then, I started my trek home. Nothing had changed, and yet it felt like something had. I remembered changing out of my cheer uniform and pulling on my sweater, but looking down at myself, my head in a daze, I was still wearing it. Robbie was still expecting an answer, his laugh pulling me from reverie.
Hey, are you good?
He peered at me through the screen, and I could glimpse his mother in the background pottering around. I noticed she kept twisting around to look at the camera, and I had no doubt she was discreetly listening in on our conversation. I told him yes and played it off like I was hiding it with makeup so I didn't confuse him even more. But when I delicately grazed my fingertips under my right eye, which I was sure had been a bulging yellow bump, courtesy of turning my coach's face a whole new shade of pale, my skin looked normal. I searched for any hints that I had been hit, pressing my fingers over my eye and waiting for that pain I knew had been real. I knew it was real because the bag of frozen, now melting peas was still in my backpack, and I had been relieved of my captain duties until my face was better. It wasn't my choice to become captain. Mom has a lot of influence with both her job and her TikTok account. So much of my life since I started middle school had been documented on her channel. Currently, she's private, so her channel is not visible. Maybe that's a good thing, though. Robbie didn't look convinced, though he nodded and smiled.
Hey, I gotta go, alright?
He gestured to his mom standing behind him with a disapproving scowl.
I've got homework.
His eyes said something different, however, and I nodded and promised to call him back later. We had a code of sorts. If Robbie pulled a face and wrinkled his nose, his mother wanted him to get off his phone. Robbie's mom wasn't a fan of me, and I guess I could see why. She called me a superficial doll behind my back when she thought I wasn't listening. It should have stung. I mean, it did sting. But part of me understood her. I had to look perfect on camera, and if a strand of my hair was out of place, my mother would drag me out of the room and tell her followers that I was having a bad day or that I was sick. The worst part is having to wake up wearing makeup. It's a 6 a.m. start every morning, with Mom pulling the three of us out of bed and then making breakfast for her, what I eat in a day, TikToks. Initially, I thought they were fun. That was until Mom started insisting on me having a single banana for breakfast instead of my usual Nutella on toast. When I commented on it, she explained it was because I was getting puffy cheeks. I looked for people on her TikToks commenting on my lack of breakfast, but most of her followers were people in our town who only gushed about our so-called good looks, and that we were a very attractive family. These people didn't see the protein shakes my brother is forced to drink every morning to stay healthy. They look and smell like vomit, and the three of us being weighed every Friday night. Luckily at school, I could eat what I wanted. I made sure to pile my plate with as much junk as possible and then threw it all back up straight after. It's not bulimia. I'm fine with eating. I just don't want Mom to see that I've eaten too much. I was still prodding my non-existent bruise when my phone vibrated and a text popped up from Coach.
Can you bring in your pom-poms tomorrow? I know you're on the sidelines, but Mickey needs them.
I had no idea how I was going to explain the sudden disappearance of my bruise. I supposed I could tell her I was using a new brand of concealer. Mom gets makeup sent to her from brands, so it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that I'd used it on my eye. When I rounded the corner of our cul-de-sac, I pushed my phone back into my pocket and dumped my backpack on the ground, unzipping it and pulling out my brush and makeup bag. I could see my brother ahead of me, already rehearsing his entrance through our front door. I could see from the way he was practically dragging himself up our driveway that Mom had already made him do it multiple times. Mom especially liked it when I wore my hair loose, so I spent 5 minutes brushing and styling it, touched up my makeup, and strode toward our house. My brother was already walking in, so it was my turn. I pasted my usual smile on my face and walked straight into Mom's iPhone, already filming every inch of me at every angle.
Here's Zoe.
Mom was using her fake voice again. I hated her fake voice.
So, as you guys know, if you're watching this for the first time, this is my 17-year-old daughter, Zoe.
She followed me into the kitchen, where my brother was lounging on the counter and my sister sitting at the table, her head in a book. These were the personalities we were urged to use in videos since they get more views. Ben is seen as the lazy child because he made it his goal not to be in front of her camera, while Allie had read a book once and now she was known as the smart one in the comments. So every time the camera was on her, she had to be holding a book. Off camera, it's the opposite. Allie secretly vapes, and as a boyfriend she hasn't told Mom about, while Ben prefers to bury himself in literary classics while cementing himself as the joker of the three of us. I dropped my backpack on the ground while Mom buzzed around me, asking me how school was. I told her my usual answer.
It was pretty fun.
Because I wasn't allowed to say anything else. I caught my brother's panicked look in the corner of my eye. He shifted on the counter to angle himself so he could get a proper look at me. Allie peeked behind her book. I had a bad day a few months back and made the mistake of saying it fucking sucked. So Mom abruptly stopped filming before pulling me upstairs to my room and lecturing me on camera, etiquette, and good manners for almost 4 hours before dragging my siblings into it. Neither of them had forgiven me for that slip-up.
I had a great time.
I decided to play up for the camera.
I got an A in social studies, and cheer practice was so fun.
I raised my arms like she had taught me, mimicking my routine. I could feel my brother and sister silently judging me, their gazes burning right through my skull. I was lying, of course. I got a C-, and I got hit in the face at practice. I gingerly prodded my right eye, feeling for the bruise that was no longer there. But Mom didn't care. It was declared on camera, so it was real. Thankfully, Mom wrapped up filming quickly, abandoning the three of us. I could already tell she was itching to edit and post the footage. Life returned to my siblings' faces once she was gone. Allie threw her book on the table with a scoff, and Ben slid off of the counter on his usual hunt for snacks, standing on his tiptoes to get to the candy in the top cupboard. I jumped up to grab myself a snack, and remembering my mom's rules about my eating, I grabbed a banana from the countertop, peeling it a little too violently. My phone vibrated. It was Coach, once again telling me to bring in my pom-poms. I lost my current ones at an event out of town, but my middle school ones were hanging around.
Where did Mom put my old cheer uniform?
I asked my brother through a mouthful of banana, leaning against the counter. My brother turns to me, already with a sly smile. What was that? I already knew he was talking about my cringe-worthy dancing.
The commenters like it.
He pulled a face. Do they enjoy vomiting too? I settled him with a glare.
My cheer things.
I said, again.
Where are they?
Ben shrugged, throwing me a Snickers bar. Basement, I think. He spoke through chewed-up chocolate, giving me an unflattering grin. I let the candy bar bounce off of the wall, reaching for another banana. I could tell my brother knew I was hungry. He'd caught me purging one time, and I had insisted it was the stomach flu. I knew he didn't believe me. In the viewer's eyes, Ben was this lazy ball of bedhead, offering minimal conversation and snoozing in the background. The real Ben, however, was your average, disgusting teenage brother with no pride. Mom didn't like that side of him, however, urging him to keep to his camera personality when she was filming. So, at any chance he could get, Ben liked to remind us he wasn't the cardboard cutout with 0 brain cells Mom turned him into.
Close your mouth.
Allie groaned, but she was smiling, relieved the three of us were off camera. She picked up her book and motioned, throwing it at his head.
I will throw it at you.
She narrowed her eyes with a playful smile.
Close your mouth, psycho.
I dare you to try. Ben shot her another chocolatey grin. You know what happens if we get a bruise, and this face has to stay perfect.
You look like a tumor. Mom doesn't care about your face.
She raised the book.
Close your mouth. You're disgusting.
That's not nice.
He stuck out his chocolatey tongue, and my sister gagged.
I'm not joking around.
Allie got ready to volley the book, and my brother jumped back with a laugh.
This is abuse.
Not if you're an animal.
He shot her a pointed yet slightly panicked look.
Okay, so, are you going to explain my black eye, or do you want me to tell Mom you threw a book at my head and gave me a concussion?
Ben's words reminded me of my disappearing bruises, and a chill skittered down my spine. Allie's lips curled when it became clear she had lost the argument, as usual. Instead of retorting something, she buried her head in her arms with another exaggerated groan. I made a point of turning to Ben, gesturing with my banana.
I'm not allowed to eat chocolate at home. You know the stupid rules.
My brother tipped his head back and grinned. tearing through his own candy bar like an animal. Your point?
My point,
I said, rolling my eyes.
Mom will kill me.
He straightened up, his expression hardening. I sneak chocolate into my room all the time. I'm not going to tell her, he said, and then turned to Allie. Neither will our little sister.
I'm 2 months younger than you, idiot.
Allie grumbled into her arm.
You guys can pig out as much as you want. I won't tell a soul.
She paused.
Because she'll kill us, and I'd rather live to see 21 without seeing our mother's wrath.
The sincerity in their voices tightened my gut. I didn't say anything to either of them, but I did take the candy bar my brother handed me on the way out of the kitchen, only to shove it in my skirt pocket when Mom glided past me, her eyes glued to her phone. Usually, she had eagle eyes. From 4 p.m. to 7, however, our mother was blind. She was already swiping through her video comments.
Sweetie, dining in an hour.
She hummed to me, her gaze on the screen. I nodded and made a quick getaway, slipping through the basement door. Clicking the light on, I blinked in the sickly glow coming to life around me. It was freezing cold, and I shivered, my bare feet slapping on concrete steps as I made my descent. Our basement was nothing special, just a glorified wine cellar. I could see my cheer pom-poms poking from a box on the ground, but my attention had already been caught by an ancient-looking television in the corner, and next to it, a plastic box full of old tapes. My mom used to be a teacher, so I figured the television was used to show students educational videos. Still though, why was it in our basement? Curiosity was getting the better of me, as I found myself drawn to the box of tapes. I reached in and pulled one out. The tape itself was battered and labeled with Zoe V.1, playing in the backyard, and V.2, middle school, scribbled in black marker pen. On VHS tapes, though. DVDs were outdated already, but these old-style, chunky tapes. I found it hard to believe Mom was documenting our early childhood on these fossils when things like phones existed while I was growing up. Blowing a layer of dust off of the tape and inserting it into the player, I pressed a bunch of buttons I didn't understand. The player worked like a YouTube video with the same symbols, so I pressed on the play button. Galvanic blue washed over my face, illuminating the wall behind me, and the tape flickered to what looked like my backyard. The picture was pretty good. The sun was shining in the sky and my little self was sitting on the back wall, kicking my legs with a wide smile. I was wearing bright red boots, my fingers caked with dirt. I could feel my own smile tugging at my lips. Mom was right. I was so cute. There was no sound on the tape, though, which I thought was odd. It was just me giggling and waving at the camera. I was waiting for something to happen, maybe my siblings to appear, when I saw it. It started as a shadow that I thought was part of the film. It was an old tape, after all, but when it started to move, morphing into a humanoid figure, I felt myself starting to move back, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow bleeding into the frame suddenly had a proper face. Mine. It was an exact replica of my little self. Its smile was the same, with wide eyes and waving arms. It wore the same bright red boots, dirt caked between its nails. I watched the replica climb onto the wall before pushing me forward, and my original self burst into a reddish mist before even hitting the ground. The tape flickered, an array of color bleeding into the film, staining the footage. It was red, like it was bleeding. In a cut, I saw the replica jump off the wall and run forward toward the camera to wipe away the red smear on the lens. The tape didn't stop. It switched to an older version of me. This time, I was in middle school. I remembered the exact classroom. I remembered the faces of the kids around me. Robbie sitting at the front, throwing pens at the wall, and Brittany doodling in her textbook. I was sitting with my head buried in an old copy of Percy Jackson. Where was the camera? I thought, my gut twisting into knots. I didn't remember Mom filming this. The tape flashed blue once again, and I blinked rapidly before it switched back to my middle school classroom. There was no sound. I saw it once more, a bleeding dark shadow creeping through my classroom door, and then growing a head and torso, arms and legs. This time it embodied my 12-year-old self, right down to the scratch on my knee I remembered getting during recess. This time, the replica was not smiling. She strode over to my desk, grabbed me by my hair, and pulled me to my feet. She shoved me violently, and I stumbled back once again, exploding into a darker red, which splattered on my desk. The replica calmly took my seat and used the cuffs of her sweater to wipe away the mess my original had made. The footage kept going, switching between snapshots of random footage. Then, it flashed to my high school changing rooms, and something sour crept its way up my throat. 4 hours ago. I saw myself changing out of my cheer uniform and the bruise under my right eye. The bruise I thought disappeared. Now, I started to crawl backward, but my gaze would not leave the screen. I couldn't breathe suddenly. All the breath dragged from my lungs. The changing rooms were empty, and I was humming the exact song from earlier, the one I'd gotten in my head from some kid mockingly singing it in class. I pulled my brush from my backpack and tugged out my ponytail, humming the tune, Ring Around the Rosie. I started to sing with each stroke of my brush. Movements behind me. I watched the door open slightly. A blurred figure slowly stepped inside. It was a darkness dressed in human flesh at first. I saw its eyes slowly coming into fruition, static buzzing in the pupils, twined around the iris. Wearing my cheer uniform, she was the exact copy of me. This time, though, her face was perfect. There was no bruise, her ponytail perfectly tied up, every strand pinned in place. When she took a step forward, I noticed she was shaking. Her hands formed fists by her sides, her perfectly made-up lips curving into a scowl. The me on the film paid no attention to my shadow self, brushing through her hair, wincing at the movement stretching the bruise on her eye. A pocket full of posies. I watched myself blink in the mirror and try and smile, parling at my eyes again. Ashes. Ashes. She started toward me in a dance, her arms thrusting out, lips stretching out into a maniacal grin. Once the two of us made contact, I followed my earlier kid selves, bursting into that same cloud of red mist, which was darker this time, staining the replica's sneakers. Turn it off. The words entered my head, and I was lunging forward to do just that, when the tape this time flickered to a different setting. This time, it was outside. I was standing at a sea of black, patches of grass and beautiful flowers. I thought it was a wedding, and then I saw the coffin being lowered into the ground. I saw my mother in a perfectly pressed black dress, sobbing on her knees. She was screaming, unearthly cries rattling through the TV's speakers. I didn't recognize any of the faces swamped around her. I started to lean closer to the screen to look at them up closely when the tape flashed to mesmerizing blue, switching to the middle school classroom, my high school changing rooms, our backyard, and finally, to me. Something snapped inside my mind, and clarity came vivid and fast, pushing away the brain fog. I didn't know those faces because they were not my family. I was paralyzed to the spot. The TV screen blurred before flashing 3 different colors like it was impatient. It once again showed me my classroom and our backyard, and it hit me that I didn't know either of them. I didn't remember any of those memories, despite a presence in my mind telling me I did. I did not sit on a wall when I was 5 years old, and that middle school classroom was not mine. This time, my face was swamped in the exact same light from our basement. I saw my present face staring, wide-eyed, at the screen. There was a twitch of movement in the grainy picture. The thing with my face moved slowly, flickering in and out of existence. I stared down at my hands in my lap, and then at my right wrist. I was not allowed to look, not with so many eyes on me. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. But I let my gaze flick to my skin, where my name has been printed on my flesh in blocky letters. It had always been there. A stray thought that was not mine entered my mind. I just wasn't allowed to look. Just like I wasn't allowed to look in the corner of my eye or behind me in a dark room. Zoe V. 1678. I could feel a striking pain in my head suddenly. A scream that was not mine and yet sounded like mine, rattling in my skull. It clawed at my throat, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Phantom bugs filling my mouth and skittering down my spine, burrowing under my flesh. She was so close, but she wasn't alone. I could hear my brothers sobbing. I could sense her shaky breath tickling the back of my neck. Ben's cries grew louder in my ear, reverberating from the walls. I was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't turn around. "You idiot," she said in a growl. "You broke character." Two sets of slimy hands were on my back. I remember the feeling of them shoving me violently. I didn't remember stumbling or falling, just their hands, and Ben's sobbing, his heaving breaths on my back. Darkness. It came fast, enveloping me, before spitting me back out again. I woke inside my room, blinking rapidly at the stars on my ceiling. I had slid back to consciousness with that same clawing, monstrous screech in the back of my throat. It wasn't mine, but it felt like mine. It felt like a scream I had been holding in and pushing down for years. The windows were dark. Night. How many hours had passed me by? Immediately, I turned my attention to my right wrist. I was not supposed to look, and just glancing at it hurt me, twisting my body and boiling my brain. I wasn't supposed to look. The marking was still there. Zoe V. 1679. The more I stared at it and drank this thing in, I felt progressively sicker. A part of me I didn't know existed, slowly coming back into fruition. Before I could stop myself, I barged out of my room and downstairs. I could hear Mom and Ben in the kitchen. "What is this?" I didn't bother warning her that I was stepping in on whatever she was filming. I marched over to my mother and held up my wrist. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Those tapes in the basement," I hissed out. "What are they? Who are those kids who replaced me?"
Wait, what?
Ben raised a brow, his gaze flickering to Mom's phone.
Is this for a video?
I didn't realize I was hysterical until I could feel hot tears slipping down my cheeks and salting my lips. I was sobbing when Mom froze up, her phone slipping from her hands. Ben, who was sitting next to her, sent me a what the fuck look, but I was only focusing on his wrist. I grabbed it and yanked up his sleeve, but there was nothing there. I peered at my brother's hand and scratched at his skin with my nails. Still, nothing.
Zoe, what are you doing?
Ben's eyes were wide.
Have you lost your mind?
Ben pulled away with a hiss. He opened his mouth to start yelling at me when Mom calmly got to her feet and turns to me with what looked like an explanation on her face, which crumpled suddenly, her eyes widening, her lips forming an O. Mom clapped her hands over her ears and shook her head, her body trembling. A scream erupted from her mouth, which morphed into a wail that almost sent me to my knees. It was powerful and painful, ringing in my ears. Ben tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. Mom wasn't blinking. She was just screaming, her lips pulled into a terrifying grimace. "Mom?" I managed to get out through sobs. I managed to get out through a sob.
Mommy, it's okay.
I wrapped my arms around her and cradled her to my chest, motioning for Ben to join in. He did after a reluctant glare, tangling his arms around the both of us.
It's okay, Mommy.
I whispered into her hair.
I won't ask any more questions, okay?
The words coming out of my mouth were not mine, but they were working. Mom's sobs were turning lighter, and her body had stopped heaving against mine. She reached around me to press me and Ben tighter to her. I was pressing my face into her hair and mumbling that I was never going to leave her, when something twitched in my peripheral. It was moving, a silhouette morphing into something real, something latched onto reality. I looked up, squinting my eyes. It wasn't a shadow or a monster bearing my face. It was Ben. The thing wearing my brother's features was disheveled, half of his hair shaved off, a bloodied jacket that I had never seen before hanging off of his shoulder. I could see that same galvanic blue light in his eyes, the flickering static from the VHS tape. He dragged himself closer to us, blood spattering the floor tiles and slicking his feet, every movement creating more pooling red. He was bleeding from every orifice, from his nose and mouth and ears, blood soaking through his jeans and torn-up shirt. The thing made eye contact with me, his previously sleepy frown twisting into a grin. I could feel myself starting to pull away from my mother, but my eyes were glued to Ben. The real Ben still had his head buried in Mom's chest, murmuring reassurances to her. Except I could see his jerking arms, like he was trying to let go of her, but couldn't. Just like me. I didn't want to hug this woman who both felt like my mother and also didn't. I wanted to get away from her. I started to say my brother's name in a choked hiss when the replica standing in the doorway slowly raised his finger to curled lips. I could see ink printed on the inside of his wrist. Ben V 1674. I opened my mouth to speak to him when he pointed across the lounge, and I followed his gaze. There was something squirming on the couch. A body-sized lump twitching, moving from side to side. I could hear its muffling now that I was allowed to hear things properly. It was screaming. No, not an it. He was screaming. Mom, I managed to whisper. I tried to pull away, but her arms were suddenly locked around me, suffocating my breath.
Who is that on the couch?
What? Ben surprised me with a whimper, his voice shaking. What do you mean? Mom's hug around us tightened, tighter. Mom! Ben's cry came out in a panicked hiss. Mom, you're hurting us. Tighter. She started screaming again, but these wails were tragic, sobbing, her hold crushing us to her chest. Mom's cry felt like it was living, a sentient thing snaking around us. Black spots invaded my eyes, dancing in my vision. Something wet and warm slid from my lips, and Ben made a choking sound. He gasped out for air that she wouldn't let us have. I felt myself go limp in her arms, my head hanging, my eyes flickering tighter. The last thing I saw was Ben's replica peeking behind the wall, hollowed out eyes penetrating mine. He was laughing, his bloodied grin growing wider and wider. When I awoke for the second time, the window was lit up with early morning sunlight. I had my hands wrapped around my throat, and the number on my wrist had changed. Zoe V 1780. When I remembered how to breathe again, I turned to my alarm clock. 7 a.m.
Zoe, breakfast.
Mom's voice filled me with poison, and once again, a thought that was not mine took center stage inside my head. She is not my mother. No, she is my mother. I had a whole life of memories with her. All right. Ignoring my skincare ritual and my makeup routine, as well as the rule that I had to stay in pajamas until the "what I eat in a day" had been filmed, I eased my way down the hallway, hammering on my brother and sister's doors. Ben appeared after a minute, his face smeared with skin cream, and then Allie, freshly showered. I thought they were going to understand that something was wrong, that we were all losing time, and something was wrong with our mother.
I need to talk to you.
Was all I managed to get out, only to get confused looks in response. Now, I bit out. I could still see Ben's bloodied replica in my mind. If that was a different version of him, when did that happen? I waited for them to get ready, standing outside their rooms. I think part of me was terrified they were going to get replaced while I was standing there. I found my gaze idly flicking to the numbers on my wrist. That had already happened to me, though. I was a different Zoe. After 10 painful minutes of waiting, the two of them finally appeared. Allie had pinned her hair back with rollers, while Ben, per Mom's request, looked like he'd just rolled straight out of bed.
What is this about?
Ben spoke through a yawn.
By the way, what was up with you last night?
Something twisted in my gut.
What do you mean?
My brother shot me a look, and whatever he was about to say was cut off when Allie shoved past us.
Move aside, slowpokes. Jeez, I'm not getting any younger.
When she was bumbling down the stairs, Ben moved closer to me.
You know what?
He rolled his eyes.
Last night you were fucking peeking behind my door. I told you to leave, but you didn't move, Zoe.
He shuddered.
Dude, it was like you were possessed. You stood there for hours. I just shut the door on your face.
Possessed. The word hung in the air when we descended the stairs and entered the kitchen. Mom was already filming herself making breakfast, while Allie had slumped down at the table and pulled out her book. I started forward to take my usual seat, but something froze me in place. There was another teenager sitting at the table. The guy was a sleepy-looking brunette, stirring his cereal into a soup, leaning his chin on his fist, eyes half-lidded, lips parted into a small smile. When he caught my eye, his mouth formed a scowl. The boy leaned back.
I'm not moving.
The boy grumbled. He turns to Mom.
Zoe always sits here. It's the best seat. And I have back problems.
He narrowed his eyes on me.
I'm taking medication.
Zoe,
Mom murmured, her focus on frying eggs.
can you let your brother use that seat this morning?
I took a slow step back. Her words were like knives stabbing into me.
What?
Mom didn't turn around. Do not argue with me, young lady. You know Nick has back problems.
Just let him have the comfy chair.
Who? Ben jumped into a seat opposite the new guy and immediately leaned over, poking the guy in the chest.
You abandoned me last night?
He said. I searched for questioning in his eyes, but he was smiling, drinking in the boy like he had always been here.
What happened to staying up all night and speedrunning classic Sonic?
The guy didn't look up from his cereal. I fell asleep. Ben folded his arms.
Yeah, well, you could have texted me.
You never answer your texts, and I banged on your wall 3 times. My brother reached for a plate of avocado toast Mom had put down, and she slapped his hand away.
I was listening to music. You know I like to chill out after I finish my homework.
Boy fight.
Allie grinned behind her book. She shot me a smirk, only for her expression to crumple.
Zoe, it's just a chair,
She said.
You've gone pale.
I couldn't respond to my sister without screaming. There was a stranger in our kitchen who I was supposed to call my brother. It hit me at that moment. If I was going to figure out what was going on with my family, I had to be exactly what Mom wanted me to be. So, I smiled at my supposedly new fucking brother and made a point of saying I felt very sick. I even dramatized gagging. When Mom felt my forehead, she nodded and said I could go to my room. But I didn't go to my room. I slipped down to the basement and went back to the box of plastic tapes. There were a bunch of new ones that I knew could not have been made that fast, and yet they had. This time, they were labeled Nick V1. I'm currently hiding in our garage with the Nick tapes. I'm too scared to watch them. I want to know what is going on, but I also don't. What I do know is that I don't think this woman is my mother, and whatever she is doing to us is documented on those videotapes. Is there someone I can call who can help me? I need to get out of here.